Mom spots a sign on the teacher's car, then the cops look in her trunk. She knew she was in serious trouble. The way the police officer looked at her, his clenched fists and stern tone, spoke volumes. She desperately assured him that there was nothing in her car that would concern him. But he clearly disagreed. A crowd had gathered, eavesdropping on their conversation. Soon, everyone would learn something surprising about their favorite teacher. Millie Glenn was a dedicated single parent working tirelessly to support her twins, Sean and Molly. Balancing a full-time job while caring for her 8-year-olds was challenging, but Millie believed they were worth every effort. Thankfully, she had the support of their teacher, Miss Smith. Miss Smith was a remarkable educator, always going the extra mile to help her students. However, Millie was unaware of the secret Miss Smith was keeping. As a devoted teacher, Miss Smith impressed all the parents with her ability to connect with their children. Millie could see that teaching her kids brought Miss Smith genuine joy, but she could never have imagined the hidden truths lurking behind closed doors. Soon, those secrets would be revealed. With summer break approaching, excitement filled the school, and both students and teachers were buzzing with anticipation. Millie dropped off her kids, watching their smiling faces as they skipped toward the gate. They were growing up so fast. Millie got to work thinking that it was going to be an ordinary day, just like any other, but that wasn't going to happen. While at work, Millie would often think about what her children were doing at that moment, probably learning something important that would come in handy in their educational journey. She was never worried about what hands she had left them in, but she couldn't have known what she would soon find out about her favorite teacher. Soon, everything would be out in the open. What the twins were actually learning while Millie was at work were the tutors. What was different about Miss Smith was her attitude. She must have been the most caring teacher at the school. Miss Smith was loved by all. The staff, kids, and parents adored her. So when her secret came out, everyone was extremely surprised by what the cop uncovered when he asked to look in her trunk. After working hard for the day, Millie rushed back to the school to pick her children up. She took the highway to get there on time. She couldn't wait to see their beaming smiles. But when she finally arrived back at the school, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There had to be a mistake, right? Millie noticed that Miss Smith's car had a note on it. She was sure that the car was hers, but what was written on it? Millie got out of her vehicle and walked toward the car. When she read it, she knew what she had to do. She took out her phone and, with shaky hands, called 911. While this was happening, Miss Smith was wrapping up her classes for the day. She made herself coffee and sat back at her desk, a smile on her face. Then she heard a knock on her door. "Miss Smith, are you there?" A coworker said. Before she could even utter a word, the door swung open as her coworker rushed into the room. Something wasn't right. The coworker told her that there was a police officer just behind her in the hallway. Miss Smith felt a lump form in her throat almost instantly. What was wrong? She ran out to meet the officer, but became even more concerned when she noticed that her boyfriend, Lewis, was standing next to the officer. What had happened, and why was Lewis involved? With a lump in her throat, Miss Smith asked her boyfriend, Lewis, what was wrong, but he just looked at the floor, avoiding all eye contact with the worried teacher. "Hi, Miss Smith," the police officer said, his tone authoritative. "I'm Officer Jones." Miss Smith looked at the officer with fear in her eyes. She had no idea that in just 15 minutes, her entire world would be turned upside down. Officer Jones asked Miss Smith if she had her car keys, which stumped her even more. She retrieved them from her designer handbag and dangled them in front of the officer. "Good. Now follow me into the parking lot," Officer Jones commanded Miss Smith. The two went out to the front by her car, her boyfriend keeping his distance. She didn't understand. Was her license expired? While in the parking lot, Officer Jones told Miss Smith that his police dog had sensed something strange near her car, which meant he had to check her trunk. Nothing made sense to Miss Smith anymore, but in a few minutes, everything would fall into place, and Miss Smith would learn the truth surrounding her car and the police officer. Miss Smith felt that she wasn't going to get a ticket or, worse, something more serious. She could see it in the officer's piercing eyes, his wide, imposing stance, and his authoritative tone. But she couldn't understand what she had done wrong. There was nothing more in the car than just a few empty water bottles and a fluffy blanket, right? Miss Smith gave the police officer permission to unlock the car and take a look inside. Within a matter of seconds, she watched the officer step inside her car, and she prepared for the worst, but she had no idea what was about to happen next. Miss Smith didn't know what to expect as she watched the police officer look around in her trunk. With every move the officer made, Miss Smith's heartbeat skipped a beat. Then suddenly, her boyfriend, Lewis, looked at Miss Smith with his bright blue eyes and pulled her in close. This brought some relief and comfort to the worried teacher. She so badly wanted him to save her from whatever trouble was ahead, but this was going to be far from easy. Miss Smith could feel tears welling up in her eyes and an uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach as she proclaimed her innocence to her boyfriend. But then suddenly, the officer who was looking through Miss Smith's trunk let out a gasp and stumbled back. What had he found? Just as Miss Smith was about to race over to her trunk to see what was inside, her boyfriend suddenly pulled her back. "What's wrong?" she asked. Turning to face him, she saw fear in his eyes, and she felt a shiver run up her spine. What her boyfriend was about to do was going to change her life forever. Miss Smith saw the officer pull something out of the trunk, saying, "That's what I thought." She couldn't see what it was, but the next thing that happened made her fear the worst. "You're going to do life for this," said the officer as he made Lewis drop to his knees and put his hands behind his back. Then he handcuffed him. Miss Smith's worry was mounting by the second. The officer then asked her to stand in front of Lewis as he went back to the patrol car to get his evidence camera. Reluctantly, she complied, and then her world was turned upside down. Miss Smith looked from her boyfriend to the officer and back. Then she watched as Lewis pulled his hands out from behind him and placed them in front of her, holding a ring. She gasped and brought her hands to her face. The officer, who was filming everything, started laughing. This had all been a ruse. Miss Smith's boyfriend got down on one knee and asked the question that all women long to be asked. "My love, will you marry me?" he asked. While his Hollywood smile sparkled in the light, he pulled out a beautiful ring, and tears of happiness streamed down Miss Smith's face. "Yes," she screamed. She hugged her boyfriend, now fiancé, but Miss Smith was confused. Was there even anything in her trunk? As the newly engaged couple embraced, Officer Jones and Millie, who had orchestrated this wonderful surprise, applauded the happy moment. However, Millie felt it was time to share the truth with Miss Smith. She gently pulled her aside and explained everything. "When I arrived at school earlier today, I found a note on your car that took my breath away. It completely changed my perspective. It was so impactful that I called your boyfriend to share my idea." But what did the note say? The note read, "Love and live every day like it's your last," a motto Millie held dear. She believed that Miss Smith and her boyfriend were meant to be together. They just needed a little nudge. Once he agreed to propose, Millie enlisted a friend from the police force to help execute this elaborate plan. And it was clear that the plan had worked.